Across the country today, farmers were protesting against the Modi government's new legislations that have been brought in as ordinances. But if you were watching your television screen, you would not know it at all. These images perhaps have been only cursorily covered by television news. Farmers everywhere holding up banners of protest, believing that the minimum support price that has been guaranteed to them for so long and over so many decades is now endangered. The BJP government has been defending the farm bills, saying that the MSP has nothing to do with it. But even one of its own allies, ideological allies, the Swadeshi Jagran Manch, has said that the MSP must be written into law and they're wanting a new law. We live in a time when almost nobody is ready to talk about India's farmers. But here at the Mojo Story channel, we are trying to do this differently. We accept that what's happening in the film industry is a story. We covered it too. And we know that there is high viewer interest in it. But we expect as citizens to be interested in our fellow citizens. When farmers, the backbone of India, protest, why aren't we listening to them? Now, it is a complex subject. Someone has to break down for us why, in fact, farmers are protesting. And I'm welcoming to the program today P.Sainath, a veteran journalist and somebody who knows this area better than anybody else. Let me start by saying hi and welcome to our channel. I want to ask you to break this down for us. We have two competing narratives here. We have the government saying that the minimum support price that has always been guaranteed to farmers is not in any way endangered by this. In fact, these legislations only eliminate the middleman. Can you explain to our audience, because this is a technical topic, especially for people who are not farmers, why India's farmers are protesting?
Something that you mentioned, which I think is pretty important, which is how the protests have been covered.
Yeah.
In terms of media, it's interesting. In terms of television or online newspaper coverage, they come a very poor third to the Narcotics Control Bureau and the Election Commission of India, both of which institutions found a pressing need to have major events today, the same day as the farmers' protests, and one unplanned and real tragedy, which is the death of S.P. Balasubramaniam, one of my favorite musicians and singers. But despite that, despite the lack of focus, there was one 3-minute period when every channel was on the farm issue. That was when the Prime Minister spoke. That was the only time the farm issue was on every channel.
Yeah.
So about break this down. See, I think that today's protests, which are, to my mind, very impressive, though they're only been covered in Punjab, Haryana.
Yeah.
I've been getting in reports through our networks and through the Nation for Farmers networks on there was a protest in every single district of Tamil Nadu. There were protests in cities and districts in Karnataka, Bengaluru, Tumkur, Mysore, Mangalore, Hubli, Dharwad, and then the districts. Maharashtra, 25, and on the Mumbai, Baroda, Jaipur, Delhi highway, there were 10,000 people. And again, very interesting, lots of non-farmers, students, youth, and bank employees unions, IT employees unions. We're all coming out in some way or the other and supporting. For me, this is something that is a new chapter in a process that really took off in 2018, when 40,000 Adivasi farmers, the poorest of farmers, marched in 182 kilometers in 42 degrees heat, barefoot, to Mumbai. That time, there wasn't a single journalist from any channel, anywhere, when the march started, because it was just 2,000 of them at the bus depot in Nashik.
Yeah.
That by the time they left the city limits, they were 20,000. The final rally in Mumbai was 50,000. And what made it different? Living 37 years in the city, first time I saw the middle classes come up and support them, bring them food, bring them water. Again, this time I'm seeing people, the Doctors for Farmers organization is active. IT employees for farmers organization is active. So I think this is a part of that process which began then in 2018. So it's good. And I also am looking at protests in Bardhaman and Midnapur in West Bengal.
Yeah.
There have been protests in significant protests in Jharkhand, in Madhya Pradesh, in Maharashtra, Karnataka, AP, Telangana, of course. So that I think is very interesting. Now, what are they protesting about?
Yeah.
Three, four things, Barkha, which are very important and which confuse the middle classes, meaning us, is that this whole thing is based on a lie and on fake assumptions. The APMC
Yeah.
has some sort of gigantic monopoly enslaving farmers. The bulk of transactions in marketable agricultural surplus have always and continue to take place outside the APMC. Most farmers part with their crop at the farm gate because they are pledged to some sahukar, moneylender, creditor, trader, commission agent, whoever. As you and I speak now,
Yeah.
farmers in Kalahandi, in Odisha, are pledging to the sahukar or the commission agent the crop of 2023 because they need to eat in 2020. You need to eat now. You don't have you had a bad year 2-3 years ago in which you pledged another year's crop. They are now pledging the crop of 2022 and 2023 to the commission agent. Yeah. So this was always in the private domain largely. Second, the model that they are trying to put forward in their APMC already exists. It exists in a market called Vashi in Maharashtra, where you have exactly these specifications. The APMC's control and power is limited. It's limited to so many thousand square feet. It has no jurisdiction outside of that. The idea of this was that once you clip the wings of the APMC, large private players will come in and set up markets and everything else. That never happened. That market has been there since 2016. The
Yeah.
model has been now for 5 years and no one's come. In Kerala, you never had an APMC. You never had an APMC legislation. You never had such a law. And no private players are there either. In Bihar, which goes to elections, it's going to be an issue. You gutted the APMC Act in 2006. You threw it out, actually. And you look at the transactions of farmers of Bihar since then. They send their makai to Haryana, for instance, and there's a huge price inflation by the time it's sold in Haryana, and neither the Haryana farmer nor the farmer of Bihar is making any gain out of it. So we have before us these 3-4 different variants which show you what will happen.
Okay, let me just interject there and try and understand what you're saying. You're saying actually this experiment of allowing the farmers access to an open market has been tried and it hasn't actually worked.
I'm saying that they were always in a shielded private market.
Right, I got that. But let me raise some of the counter arguments that have been commonly used to defend this legislation, right? One, of course, has been the point that the Shanta Kumar panel is being quoted, which says that only 5.8% of farmers actually sell at the minimum support price. The other is to argue that the middleman is being eliminated. The third is to argue that this concerns only the more privileged farmers of Punjab and Haryana, which is where the MSP is really operational. And 60% of India's farmers that are small and marginal are being ignored, that this is the noise, the dominant noise of the Punjab and Haryana, more well-off farmers that is leading this discourse.
Okay. We'll get to that first argument in a moment. But the one thing I'm saying is that agriculture, the marketable surplus, was always in a private market. By the way, I think Shanta Kumar's figures on MSP are dated, but that's not so. That you're very, very dated on how many farmers are accessing, but that's not the most important point here. I think the best way your viewers would understand what an APMC is a comparison which I've been making repeatedly. The APMC is to agriculture what the government school is to education, what the PHC is to the health sector. Now, you know, and you have visited, I don't know how many hundreds of government schools. They're awful. They're awful. They've been systematically, degraded. Lack of funding. We are one of the lowest spenders on education, even amongst South Asian nations. We are not a great spender. Sri Lanka is way ahead of us. Most of them don't have toilets, and for girls, most overwhelmingly, they don't have toilets. They have broken blackboards, and yet, do you want to close them? Tens of millions of Indian children, if they go to school at all, it's because those schools exist. The idea is to strengthen those schools, to make them so good that in 30, 40 years in the countryside, one of the jokes in the country, oldest cliches and jokes in the countryside is, the DM's son should go to this school, because then everything will improve. Right? If the collector's son, DM's son goes to the school, everything will improve. The point is, these government schools are the APMCs of the education sector. They're bad, they're flawed, they're problematic, they're difficult, and they're the only place tens of millions of poor children can go. Likewise, in the APMC, only some farmers have been able to access that, because the others are tied down in debt and non-written contractual agreements with the very people whose hold we are trying to now increase over the agricultural sector. Okay, you are then also accompanying this bill with an amended Essential Commodities Act, which essentially tells you that all those essential commodities are no longer essential, except in extraordinary circumstances like war and famine and stuff like that. So the idea of APMC being some evil empire to liberate farmers from is so stupid. The idea should be that every farmer should have access to the minimum support price. And that, by the way, is tied up to ending indebtedness in farmers. Now, Barkha, last 2 days, I have been proposing a law based on entirely on Mr. Modi's positions since 2011. In 2011, when he was Chief Minister of Gujarat, he was also chairman of that working group, of the Ministry of Consumer Affairs, when he recommended very strongly, it is, I think, the clause is B.3 in that report, where chairman of that group, Mr. Modi, says no transaction between trader and farmer should be permitted below the MSP. Okay, this is one thing he said. 2000.
Right.
You can just get onto the net and check it out
Yeah,
immediately.
I'm making a note. Yeah.
Second, Mr. Modi has said many times in the last few days, you have my assurance that never will the MSP be taken away or die. The third thing he said is that these acts are in fact a cleanup towards his goal of doubling farmer income by 2022. In fact, they've managed to link income increase to the Essential Commodities Act, which is absurd because the Essential Commodities Act never restricted farmers from stockpiling. It restricted big traders, hoarders, corporations, big players from hoarding. It never put a cap on what farmers were stockpiling. So by removing those caps, the entire act in the first place and the entire APMC in the first place, all these came to break monopolies. Now you're removing them and saying we are breaking the middleman.
Yeah.
Okay, that is one thing. And the in the APMC, what percent? I think maybe 13% or whatever about the issue of Punjab, Haryana.
Yeah.
I think the farmers of Punjab and Haryana are showing the rest of the country the way. They managed to fight and get an APMC that worked somewhat relative to other places. They managed to fight and get an MSP and see to it that that MSP was paid. It's what farmers elsewhere want. Okay? It's what farmers in other parts of the country want. And we are saying, hey, those guys are privileged. Take it away. So let's take away the government schools. Yeah, I mean, kids have choice. They have choice. They can go to GD Goenka. They can go to DPS. They can go to modern school, right? By the way, lots of poor students go to expensive private schools, which are expensive for them, because their parents take loans to send them to school. And they don't get education loans from the banks. They get their loans from the Sahukar. So this idea that Punjab, here is some creamy layer of farmers. These are layers of farmers who have fought and got that APMC to work 50% for them, which is not the case elsewhere. Then the other thing is there are about 22, 23 commodities which have come under the MSP.
MSP, yes. 23, I think, yes.
And of these, the main are wheat and rice.
Yes.
It stands to reason that it will create the maximum excitement in Punjab and Haryana. It will create and Western UP. That's where it will create the maximum tension because in other places they're fighting to get it. Here they're fighting to save it.
So can I ask you what you therefore think is the intent, according to you, behind these legislations? Who will these legislations benefit? Because if you listen to the government actually says that they will benefit the farmers. You've countered that. If you believe the farmer will be hurt, and you essentially believe that farmers all across India have a right to what the Punjab and Haryana farmers have been able to approximate for themselves to some degree, who will these legislations benefit?
I think that who the government intends them to benefit, and the result of this may be slightly at variance. Of course, they're intended to benefit the corporate sector. Why are we so naive about this when it has happened in every other sector? Now, Barkha was a guy who till today maintained a BSNL cell phone because it was the only damn thing it worked in the places
everywhere.
So that was the only place it worked. Then they kill it. They don't allow them to go from 3G to 4G. The minister says, we are going directly to 5G, so we won't go to 4G. They kill BSNL, they murder it, and they're going to hand it over to the corporate sector. They've done this in sector after sector. Why do we imagine that they have someone else in mind to benefit from these moves? But I'm saying that Mr. Modi can resolve this with a small 5-paragraph law. Okay.
which is
Yeah, which is it has 4 elements and a conclusion. The 4 elements are: one, uh, the Prime Minister has assured us, and the BJP promised it before the 2014 elections, MSP guaranteed to be implemented within 12 months under the Swaminathan formula. That was the promise of 2014 made by the present Prime Minister.
yeah.
So that will be the first element. The second element will be exactly what he put in his 2011 report. Exactly what he put in that 2011 report. The second element will be no transaction, APMC, outside APMC, whatever. No transaction between trader, corporation, and farmer can occur at lower than the MSP rate. The third element would be guaranteed procurement. Because governments have learned, Mr. Vilasrao Deshmukh did this ages ago over here. You declare very high MSPs. There are thousands of suicides in Vidarbha, so you declare a high MSP for cotton and you don't procure.
Yeah.
And you play the mischief by opening half the number of centers that are required, by delaying the opening of the centers, by which time you as a small farmer are so desperate, you'll sell it to anyone who will pick it up at any price. You've got to eat, you've got to pay your bills and your creditors. Third, they close the procurement centers 15, 20 days early so that latest arrivals are diverted towards private trade. So the third element of the thing would be guaranteed procurement. Yeah. And which is what the Punjab and Haryana farmers achieved significantly, which we are trying to take away. And four, the thing about doubling incomes, I would love to have their incomes doubled. But common sense and a school kid of 10 will tell you that nobody's income can be doubled, whether by 2022 or by 2042. Nobody's income can be doubled who is drowning in debt. So you declare a cancellation of farm debt. All over the world under the pandemic, demands are coming for cancellation of third world debt, cancellation of debt within advanced Western countries. Now,
Yeah.
for the intent and the results of what happened, let's look at the health sector. You are now heading to be the worst on COVID, the worst nation on COVID. Yeah, you're doing more rapid antigen tests than RT-PCR
RT-PCR.
tests, and you're still showing such horrible numbers. If you did proper testing, if you were in the top 5 large countries, their range of testing, your cases are going to show up, your infections are going to show up a lot more. Now consider India has one of the most privatized health systems in the world. Okay.
Yeah.
In your country, in this decade, Public Health Foundation of India has told all of us, that 55 million Indians fell below the poverty line in a single year solely due to health expenditures, which are the second fastest, in many places, the fastest growing component of rural family debt. You remember the Public Health Foundation saying their study showed 55 million people fell below the poverty line due to health expenditure. We are very much on the American model. In the United States, a Harvard study shows you that 60% of individual bankruptcies were from health, from health expenditures, lack of coverage, etc. Now, the entire philosophy, when you're asking about the intent, I also want to put this into the philosophy. The entire philosophy is not different from what we entered in the brave new world of neoliberalism in 1991. And that philosophy, the more discredited it is in the world, the more we cling on to it, which is that free market as freedom and state support for poor citizens as slavery. That is the philosophy. Okay? The free market is freedom and state support. Now, the free market, you know exactly how free it is and for whom it is free. Who are the people it's free for? Yeah, it's free for Davos. It's free for our multi-billionaires. Yeah. And this philosophy and the which has meant that we have enhanced the privatization even of our wretched health sector. Please remember that the last pre-pandemic budget, this government put up district level hospitals for privatization of management, right? So of that, on the contrary, or rather on the other side, advanced capitalist nations like Spain and Ireland, the first weeks, if not the first week of the pandemic, nationalized all private medical resources. And they are still nationalized. I'm sure they will feed them, nurture them, and return them to their private owners. That's what Sweden did with banks in 91.
Yeah.
But we, 1 month into the pandemic, the Delhi government is mildly asking the corporate hospitals, let's have 50% of the beds. Maharashtra finally decides enough is enough and takes over 80% of beds. Far more capitalistic nations than us simply nationalized the entire health sector. So I'm saying that is the philosophy, and the intent flowing from that philosophy is natural.
What happens now? I've got about 5 minutes left, so I want to look at where this protest can lead. Now, I want to bring up, I was interviewing somebody from the Swadeshi Jagran Manch yesterday, Dr. Ashwini Mahajan, and he said, we are okay with the intent of this legislation, but we are not okay with the MSP not being written into law. That is causing anxiety among farmers. So we would urge the government to bring in a new law. They're also asking for a new law as ideological partners of this government, a new law, one that would stipulate a guaranteed MSP. And I'm asking you, not that I think that will happen, but if it were to happen, is that a way forward? What is the way forward from this moment?
I think the way forward from first thing, it's not just enough to have a new law guaranteeing MSP. It's got to have those other elements. MSP as the Swaminathan formula, cancellation of debt, otherwise you're not going to double anyone's income, the guaranteed procurement, and no transactions below MSP rate anywhere. If that is the law, it'll make a huge difference. However, if that is the law you bring in, everyone, including those 8 MPs suspended, will be dying to get back into parliament and vote for it. Yeah, the chances of it happening, you can look at from the chronology of this government's positions on MSP. 2014, before he became Prime Minister, I will implement Swaminathan Commission formula within 12 months of coming to power. 2015, court affidavit. We cannot implement this. It would lead to distortion of market prices. 2016, Radha Mohan Singh says, we never made such a promise. 17, they are boasting about Shivraj Singh Chauhan's model. 18 and 19, Mr. Arun Jaitley says in the budget speech, paragraph 13 and 14, we have already implemented the Swaminathan report on formula. We have already done it for Rabi, we will do it for Kharif. 2020, Mr. Narendra Tomar says, we are the only party that has respected and honored the Swaminathan Commission. So good luck with that. What you can expect from the government, this is the track record. And Mr. Shanta Kumar was the very man who was there in the food ministry when in 2002, we had such a gigantic crisis, and you saw the results after that. Yeah. So I'm saying that if it's done on those elements, all of which have been at different times backed by the PM, it could happen.
Okay, I have a couple of minutes left, and there's one question. I mean, there are many questions, but I've just picked up one of them from Rajiv Mulye, who says the debts were cancelled by Sharad Pawar as suggested by P.Sainath. Why did it not then end the problem for farmers in Maharashtra?
It was never cancelled as per my suggestion. I wish I had that kind of clout. And the last person ever to take my advice on agriculture would be Mr. Pawar. Okay? Mr. Pawar who set up the Swaminathan Commission in 2004 December, between 2004 December and 2006 October. The
Yes.
Swaminathan Commission submitted 5 reports, the fifth report having 2 volumes and a national draft policy on farmers. Mr. Pawar was agriculture minister. In the next 15 years, you have not had one day's discussion on those reports. You're having a Santa Kumar Commission, which means
Yeah.
nothing to me or to anyone else. Yeah. So there was never a debt cancellation of a serious nature. And on the other hand, and there is also this great myth that the NPAs of banks are due to the farmers' loans.
Mhm.
7 lakh 50,000 crores, 7.5 lakh crores are from big business and corporations. They are not from farmers. Okay. So that cancellation of the debt never actually took place as he imagines.
Okay, finally, because I'm out of time, there is a sense, obviously, politics drives everything that a government does, right? So it's only if the government gets anxious that there will be a political backlash to this. Unfortunately, that perhaps farmers will not feel as invisible as they might be feeling today, especially in how their stories are being told in the mainstream media. Do you believe that this is an inflection point, or do you believe that this will go like demonetization, where the assumption was that there would be a huge backlash, but there was no backlash for the Modi government for what most people believe was a flawed and dangerous decision?
I think that without a doubt, people saw or came to see demonetization as a terrible thing. Elections, though, are not fought on a unicausal single thing. Very
Yeah,
sometimes,
yeah.
exceptionally, yes. But then other issues come up. And you can see that different parts of the country voted very differently. In that, I mean, the South voted in one way, with the
Mhm.
exception of Karnataka, and the East voted in another way. West and North voted in the Hindi belt, voted for Mr. Modi. And so it's difficult to make that kind of connection, but of course, politics drives it. Yeah. Also, it's a little more than politics when you've got a prime minister for whom admitting that something is a mistake is just impossible. You know, to say that, okay, we goofed up here, let's move back. That is not known to this government.
Well, the land ordinance, if you remember, did see a rollback. That is one of the legislations, but that was way back, and politics has changed since then. Very quickly, final word, Mr. P.Sainath, where does this agitation go from here, from this moment, from this one-day Bharat Bandh, where it's competing with the Deepika Padukone for mind space?
It's interesting. It contested very well, not in television channels, but please, for 8 hours on social media, on Twitter, 331,000 tweets. I mean, this was number 1 to 4 in the top 10 for several hours. It means that people are concerned, even if the TV channels are not concerned, or the TV channels are simply frightened of doing it any other way. Like they are frightened of discussing Mr. Modi appearing in Time magazine's list of 100. They don't want to explain why he is there in that list. Okay. So I'm saying that it's interesting the amount of public support on Twitter, at least on social media, it's there. Yeah.
Okay.
And the organized troll armies are not part of those. Right.
Okay.
These are from ordinary people. I think that things will get better, but I think things will get a lot worse before they get better. I think that you have a government that functions that way. I think things are going to get terrible, and you're going to see communalization, efforts to shift attention from these issues to claim great successes for some ridiculous model somewhere. I think we are going to have more of the same, and things will deteriorate further. But I think today the farmers across the country have shown us that even under a pandemic, even under a lockdown, they're willing to come out on the streets and fight for their rights. That process that started in 2018 is now going ahead. And that, I think, is the positive.
Thank you very much for deconstructing a very complex piece of legislation. And I think what's most important is no matter which side of the debate you're on, the fact is that there is no dialogue that has taken place with the stakeholders, which are the farmers. Even if you do not want to talk to the opposition parties, at least talk to the farmers, talk to the farmers' unions. We hope that the rest of the media will pick up the story. But as P.Sainath said, whether TV shows it or not doesn't mean that the issue is going anywhere. If your farmers are on the street, you do need to pay attention. Thank you. Thank you, sir, and thank you to our audience. We will keep tracking this story. We will follow the farmers' agitation and keep bringing you different voices on this critical issue. Thank you very much, and thanks for watching. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.